The 12 Rules by Estonia Shaw. Rule number 5. Always have a map. I mean that literally and figuratively. Most people don't appreciate how easy it is to get lost. Most people don't realize how lost they are in life. Others are just lost in the source. The point is, it's really, really easy. Now, one of the most basic ways not to get lost is to know where you've been, where you are, and where you think you are going. No shit, you might say, that's obvious. One might say that that's even the definition of not being fucking lost. To which I say, maybe. But if it were obvious, no one would ever veer off course now, would they? A map helps with that. Now take my supervisor Lee, for example. He knows exactly where he is and exactly where he needs to go. He's not lost. His love for his son is his map, and as such, Lee's stuck here in an endless search for him. He's kind of an arsehole and I trust him as far as I can throw him, but he sure as shit isn't lost. See rule number 3. Now contrast that with Sarah, our local deity. She has no clue where she's going. She can tell you where she's been like the genealogies of Genesis, and boy is she a boring storyteller. Bless her heart though. But she couldn't tell you where the fuck she is or where she's trying to go, if you get my drift. You know, figuratively, in life, no map. And then there's Mikey. Nothing figurative here, he just forgot his actual map and we found ourselves wandering around a goddamn hellish twisted version of reality, all because Mikey wasn't paying attention to what he was doing. Thanks, Mikey. Well, Sarah, Mikey and I had crammed into a cab of our truck and we were making rounds for our quarterly maintenance rodeo. This required us to drive around doing basic maintenance on everything from pump stations and generators to solar collectors. It was usually boring, but not always. We plodded along northwards towards the impact ranges for the big guns, artillery, aircraft and tanks, and then skirted those via the maintenance roads. The air was still and only made the heat worse than normal, if such a thing was possible. Mirages formed in the distance and dissolved as we neared. Not all, but most. How long you've been here, Sarah? Her brow raised. Oh, 4 years or so. I usually move on after 7 or 10, so I have a few left in me yet. And before that? Well, I mean, she smiled sadly. I could talk endlessly about that, couldn't I? Sure, but I mean, where did you come from originally? She rolled her eyes. It's hard for me to answer. I've been immortal for as long as I can remember. Not that that is all that odd around here or anything. And I can remember a long time, but I'm not sure I came from anywhere specifically. I can be sure it didn't have anything resembling a map you'd recognize today. Anatolia, maybe? I frowned. Okay, so what's your earliest memory? Being awash in light, playing among gods, being abandoned, then alone, lost. So I wander and wander. When I get bored, or the people I know and love start to find something odd about how I don't age, I leave. And it all ends, yet I live on. Are you like an angel or some sort of god, maybe? I asked. She snickered. Oh wait, no. Mikey slammed on the brakes. A puzzled look crept over his face. He stepped out into the dirt and looked around as if confused. Hey Mikey, what's up? This isn't right. We should have gotten there by now. His eyes widened in realization of something. Oh no. He walked around to my side of the truck and reached into the glove box, searching frantically before stopping entirely. Sarah, did you happen to bring a map? No, she replied slowly. Shit, well, we definitely crossed the aperture. The what? I asked. Mikey looked around nervously. The aperture, we are in a, shall we say, a different reality? And it's dangerous, he stuttered. The map would tell us where everything is on this side and where the aperture is at different times of the day, so we can get back without having to... Is this one of those mess with the new guy things, or are you being serious? I pressed incredulously. Oh, come on, really, we have to do this? You sure you checked everywhere? Check again, do it quick, clock's ticking. Sarah's tone silenced me and kicked Mikey back into action. Mikey tore the cab of the truck apart looking for the map. As we waited, I looked over the landscape waiting for them to stop messing around. At first, I thought the heat was causing my eyes to blur, but it was soon clear that roads and terrain features distant from us started to shift and change. The sky turned from blue to dark red, and the sand from tan to deep orange. By the time the mountain ranges melted into sand, Sarah was fuming and Mikey's desperation reached a profanity-laced crescendo. Well, great, look at that. Time's up. Listen, Rook, never forget a map. You get lost like this and you are in for a heartache. Normally the aperture oscillates over the impact ranges on our side of reality, the real, so it's never a problem. But occasionally it drifts onto post. The good thing about the map is that it will guide you to the exit aperture without having to go through the cantonment area, which is what we have to do now. The only other way out is through the spire. Mikey climbed back into the cab and waited for us. What is the aperture though, really? Why is it? It's prehistory. It was a prison built long ago by powers unknown, Mikey replied coldly. The post was no longer what I recognized. The terrain was inverted and the dirt roads had no counterparts in the real. Some branched and inverted upon themselves in an endless loop while others ended abruptly, going nowhere. Thankfully, an ominous cinder spire rose from the cantonment area, easily visible even from the horizon. This structure had no worldly analogue but served as our North Star. The barren desert of the other gave way to sparse dustings from something organic infesting the dirt. I couldn't see clearly as we sped past, but I imagined it to move and pulsate like a sea of worms. The nearer we drew to the twisted center of this reality, the more abundant these fleshy infestations became. If it was a prison, then what was imprisoned here? I asked. Sarah and Mikey glanced at one another. We don't know really, we just hear the rumors. And on we drove in silence, as the organic growths became more common. They grew in size from mere inches to a dozen feet or more in height, and in all instances these things moved and swayed in the absence of wind. We passed the first intersection demarcating the cantonment area, and in the place of the static patterned geometric forms and constructions indicative of man, stood mute, organic, chaotic refutations of such amateur control over the world. Columns of bone branched out over the streets, while masses of wriggling tubule-like grotesqueries crunched under the tires of our truck as we sped onwards towards the base of the spire. We stopped mere feet from its trunk and Mikey killed the engine. Well, we're going to get our asses chewed for losing this truck. Well, I will. I mean, it's my fault, obviously. I'll do the financial liability investigation of property loss on it. As we stepped into the open, I could hear the throbbing of the spire and could see its skin tense and loosen in odd synchronization, as if it were beating of a heart. The stench of sour bile permeated everything. Okay, let's get this over with. Sarah led the way. We moved towards the gaping 3-story gash in the trunk of the spire, brushing aside sinew and drapes of flesh. The path we followed was like an artery with the smaller branches shooting off in all directions. I could tell that ever so slightly, we were going downwards deeper into the labyrinth. The further we went, the louder the rhythmic melodies of this place became to the point we could feel the reverberations in our chests and struggled to hear one another. Finally, we reached the heart, a wet, bulbous thing the size of a house. It convulsed even more rapidly the nearer we drew, as if it were excited. So what now? We have to succumb to it before we can leave. Watch. Whatever happens, follow me through. Sarah stepped towards the heart. She placed her hands on the soft mucus-covered wall of the palpitating structure. Then she pressed her hands into it, opening a fissure. It resisted at first, but then gave away. She fell forward with a brief yelp before being pulled violently into the fissure in the engorged organ. Then she was gone. All right, Rook, see you on the other side, Mikey called to me as he too pressed his hands against the heart and penetrated it. With Mikey, however, I could hear him scream in agony before being abruptly cut off as he was consumed by it. I was alone and overcome with fear of the unknown, fear of death. My internal turmoil was cut short as movement in the dark got my attention. One of the faceless men stood a dozen meters from me. It seemed to be in as much shock by my presence as I was by its. They exist here too. Perhaps they come from here. Before I could further contemplate its being, it launched itself towards me. The featureless void where its face ought to have been became clear, and I saw stars, a timeless expanse. I snapped out of my awe and plunged my hands into the heart. As soon as my hands pierced it, a searing pain shot through me. Every inch of me that passed into the heart erupted into blinding white-hot pain. My bones shattered, skin split, and fed the thing. Unimaginable agony radiated up my arms as I was sucked in. The rest of me followed as the heart pulled with all its unimaginable strength. For the briefest moment, I felt as if every cell, every atom was ripped from me, and at the end of it all was darkness. Nothing. That was the most surprising thing. In hindsight, obviously, it was nothing. They weren't even thoughts of reflection, just nothing. Like death itself. Then, once I was conscious again, climbing out of a pit of scorching California loam, 2 pairs of hands reached down to help me up. As they touched me, my nerves continued to scream from the pain of deconstruction. "Well, that's 2 you owe me, Rook." Sarah smiled. "Oh, fuck right off," I replied. We were back where we belonged, in a nondescript location of the cantonment area. I told both Mike and Sarah what I saw in the end, one of the faceless men. Mikey looked confused, but Sarah obviously knew more. She tightened up and averted my gaze. Later that night, when Mikey had already gone home, she finally confided in me. "Listen, Rook, the aperture isn't an intentional part of the prison. The heart was the warden, the only entrance and exit point. The faceless men were its custodians, and they followed a fugitive here. The aperture is the rip caused by reality by something that escaped.